Well, good morning to you all, and happy Mother's Day. It is wonderful to be here with you today. I'm going to invite you to open with me to the book of Ruth, and we're going to begin our study there in just 1 minute. Go ahead and turn with me to the book of Ruth. While you're turning there, I just want to say that it's wonderful to be here on Mother's Day, and I hope all of you who are mothers here just know how special you are to all of us. It is a special thing to be able to come here and worship on a day that means so much to us and means so much in our society. It is fitting and proper as people of God that we would honor our mothers who do so much for us and are given to us as blessings from God. So, happy Mother's Day. It seems to me that we sometimes have an easier time finding godly examples of manhood in the scriptures than we do godly examples of womanhood. Would you agree with that? Sometimes it's easier to find big, huge stories about godly men than it is to find big stories about godly women. I mean, if you're a man and you want to look for an example of godly manhood, you've got lots of options to choose from, right? You can look at Abraham or Moses or David, and if all else fails, then you just go look at Jesus, right? The very Son of God came in the form of a man. It's very easy to find good examples of godly manhood. And it's a little bit harder to find good examples of godly womanhood. I mean, there are plenty of good women in the Bible, but their stories tend to be shorter and less detailed. And you can go to Proverbs 31, you can read about the worthy woman, and she's got wonderful qualities, but at the end of the day, she's not a real person, right? She almost can feel like an unattainable ideal. It's a little bit harder to find examples of godly womanhood. And so this morning, what I want to do is I want to show you something that I think is great. I want to show you a living, breathing example of a worthy woman. The story of Ruth doesn't tell a story about gleaming swords or swirling spears or towering giants or crazy kings. The contents of this book are far more relatable. In this book, we read about regular people, harsh realities, a worthy woman, in one absolutely incredible choice that she makes. Begin reading with me, Ruth chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. The Bible tells us this. Now it came about in the days when the judges governed that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem and Judah. Now they entered the land of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They took for themselves Moabite women as wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they lived there for about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and the woman was bereft of her 2 children and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the land of Moab, for she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. So she departed from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, but we will surely return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I do have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight and also bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you. For the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me." The story that we find in the book of Ruth, it begins with a famine in the land of Israel that ultimately drives a family to sojourn in the land of Moab. And so there's a man named Elimelech, and his wife is named Naomi, and their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. They leave the promised land and they go to the land of Moab looking for food, and that's where disaster strikes. Somewhere along the way, Elimelech dies. And while Naomi's two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, they end up marrying two Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah, those two boys, they end up dying as well. And so that's the setting for our story. Think about that. 3 widows, without a man to provide or protect them, living in a land plagued by famine and death. 3 widows all by themselves. Things in the book of Ruth are looking terribly bleak, especially for Naomi. And so it's in this moment that Naomi looks at her daughters-in-law and she tells them, look, the thing that you need to do right now is you need to just go back home. There's still hope for you. We're still in the land of Moab. Your old family is right here. You can leave me right now. You can go back to your mother's house and look, your life, it'll turn out okay, right? Yes, you lost your first husband, but you'll be able to go home. You'll be able to be cared for and provided for. Maybe you'll be able to get married again. Just let me go home by myself and you go back to your mother's house. And so Naomi tells them, look, just go back and start life over. And so Ruth and Orpah, they're faced with this critical decision. Do you leave Naomi behind and go back home to your family? Or do you stay with her and remain loyal to her? It's worth pointing out that leaving Naomi behind, it wouldn't have been an easy thing to do. I mean, obviously, 40 or 50 years old for a woman is not old. I had in my notes it's old. It's not old. 40 and 50 for a woman is not old. Let's just say that. But in this time, it is very old, right? She's not going to have another husband again. She's not going to have more children again. She's kind of in a position in her life where she's stuck. She's going to have a hard time providing for herself and protecting herself, right? She is not in a good place in her life. And when Ruth and Orpah, when they decide, hey, we're going to leave you behind, they're condemning her to a very difficult life. They're condemning her to walk home and provide for herself all alone. It's not easy to leave Naomi. And at the same time, it's also really difficult to stay with Naomi. She's an older woman without food, without money, without a man to protect her, with a perilous journey in front of her. And even if she does make it home, she's got nothing left there to sustain her or provide for her. She doesn't have land to go back to or a house to go back to or some huge hefty inheritance. She doesn't have boys back there that she can give to Ruth and Orpah. She is totally empty. There is nothing that Naomi has left to give to Ruth and Orpah. She's totally empty. And so these two women are left with this huge choice. Do you stay with Naomi or do you go back to your family? All of this, it's too much for Orpah. And so she decides to do what Naomi suggests. She goes back to her family. We read that in verse 14. And they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Then she said, behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. And so Orpah decides that that's too much. She can't stay with Naomi. She wants to get something out of her life. So she goes home to her mother's house. But the incredible thing about this story is that in this huge moment, Ruth chooses to stay. It says in verse 16, but Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. And when she saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. And so when Ruth has the option of just staying in Moab and going back to everything familiar and comfortable, she makes this absolutely amazing choice to stay. Ruth chooses faithfulness and loyalty and sacrifice and love. And it is that choice that makes Ruth such a worthy woman. And what I want to do with you this morning for a few minutes is I want us to dwell on what exactly makes her choice such an incredible choice. I want to think about this amazing choice that Ruth makes and why it makes her such a worthy woman. And after I talk about that for just a little bit, you guys will be free to go home or go out and enjoy your Mother's Day lunch. But that's what I want to do. Just tell you a few things, few reasons that makes this choice so amazing. And I want you to see this first of all. One of the things that makes this choice so amazing is that Ruth chooses what is easy. Ruth chooses what is right rather than what is easy. Sorry, let me say that again. Ruth chooses what is right rather than what is easy. There is nothing easy about Ruth's choice to stay with Naomi. She and Naomi are currently in the land of Moab. Ruth is not very far away from her family and everything familiar to her. She isn't far from her people. She isn't far from her gods. She isn't far from everything that she's always known for her entire life. It would be the easiest thing in the world for her to look at Naomi in this moment and say, look, I want to stay. I wish I could stay, but I just can't. And then give her a big hug and then go back to your mother's house. It would be the easiest thing in the world. And even the guilt that she might feel for being selfish in this moment, that's assuaged a little bit by the fact that Orpah already decided to go back to her mother's house, so she's not the only one choosing to leave Naomi. Staying at home, going back to her mother's house would have been the easiest, most convenient thing in the world for Ruth. It would have been familiar and safe and easy. And yet the amazing thing about Ruth is, the thing that makes her a worthy woman is that she does not choose what is easy. Instead, she chooses what is right. And I think by doing that, she sets a good example for men and women in our day. But maybe especially for wives. Maybe especially for mothers. Because it seems to me that when you think about what it's like to be a woman or a wife or a mother in the 21st century, it seems to me like you guys are faced with decisions like this every single day. You are faced with decisions where you have to choose, am I going to pick what is right or am I going to pick what is easy? Every single day, mothers have to choose. Am I going to raise my kids like everybody else? Or am I going to bring my kids up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord? It is easy. It is easy to raise kids like everybody else. It is easy to just go with the flow and raise your family the way that everybody else in the world raises their family. But it is a hard thing to do, to raise your kids to know God and to love God and to serve God and to sacrifice for God. It is easy to be like everyone else. It is hard to raise your family the way you know you need to. It is easy to avoid those hard discussions that you have to have in your family. It's easy to avoid those hard discussions about spiritual things. It is easy to avoid those discussions with your husband where you say, look, I wish we prayed more in our house. I wish that we did better about attending Bible class or being at services. Or I think we need to be a little bit more careful about what we watch on TV after the kids go to bed. It is easy to avoid those kinds of discussions. It is hard to be the kind of woman who brings those things up in your home. And every single day, women have to choose, am I going to do what is easy or am I going to do what is right? It is easy to build a marriage that looks like every other marriage in this society. It is hard to build a godly marriage that is full of self-sacrifice and loyalty and submission. As a young lady, it is easy to dress like everybody else and post like everybody else and do what everybody else does and prioritize what everybody else prioritizes, but it is hard to live a life of chastity and dignity and godliness. It is hard to be spiritual amongst the worldly. And so, like Ruth, the women in this building, the mothers and the wives, and even the single women who are here today, you are faced with choices like these every single day. Am I going to do what is easy and familiar and convenient, or am I going to choose what is right? And I want you to appreciate that worthy women are the ones who make choices like Ruth. They're the ones who look at whatever's easy and whatever's convenient, and they say, even though that's so much easier than being this godly, worthy woman, I'm going to make the right choice in this moment. What makes a woman worthy is that she chooses what is right, when it would be so much easier to choose something else. I want you to see something else about this incredible choice, though. I want you to see also that Ruth chooses what is right rather than what is prosperous. Earlier in the story, Naomi tells Ruth and Orpah again that she is empty. She has absolutely nothing left to offer them. Ruth 1 and verse 11, but Naomi said, return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight and also bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. Naomi tells Ruth and Orpah that she is empty. She isn't getting married. She isn't going to have more kids. If she did have more kids, there'd be no guarantee that they were sons. And even if she did have more kids and they were sons, there's no way that Ruth and Orpah are going to wait until those boys are all grown up in order to have husbands again. Naomi has absolutely nothing to offer them. If they choose to go back to their mother's houses, then they at least can find some safety, they at least can find some comfort, they can find some security, and they'll probably be able to get married again and have husbands again. If they go with Naomi, they've lost all hope for any of that, because Naomi can't give them that. We see just how empty Naomi is as we go further into the story. It tells us that when they returned to Bethlehem in verse 19, so they both went until they came to Bethlehem. And when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? And she said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? So Naomi returned, and with her Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, who returned from the land of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Once Ruth and Naomi get back to Bethlehem, everybody sees them return, and they say, is that Naomi? Because everybody sees that the state that she's in is so different than the state in which she left. She says, I went out full. I had a husband and I had 2 sons and we were doing great. And now I came back and I've got no husband, I've got no sons, and all I've got is my daughter-in-law with me. I went out full. I came back empty. It also tells us at the end there that they got back to Bethlehem at the time of the barley harvest. Think about that. This is the time of the year when everybody who's been planting seeds and growing their crops and taking care of their fields, this is the time of the harvest, right? This is the time when you get the payoff for all the work that you've been doing throughout the entire year. This is the time when you bring in the harvest that is supposed to sustain you through the hard months that are coming. And what does Naomi have? She hasn't been planting seeds. She doesn't have a field that's been growing crops. She doesn't have any food that's waiting for her in some storehouse somewhere. She gets back, and not only does she have no home and no food and no field, but she's got no crops. She's got nothing to eat. She is totally empty. And so the story actually tells us in Ruth chapter 2 that ultimately what Ruth has to do is she has to get a job as a professional vagrant. She has to work as a scavenger and a beggar. And so she spends her days picking up the scraps that are left behind in the field of a man named Boaz. And that's incredible to me. Instead of going home and getting married and doing all of these things that would bring comfort and security, Ruth chooses to stay with Naomi. and scavenge for food in the field of some man that she doesn't even know. Ruth chooses what is right rather than what is prosperous. And I think she sets a wonderful example for women in our day by choosing what is right instead of what is prosperous. You know, we hear a lot in society about what women should be and what women should do, don't we? If you listen to the news long enough, or some podcast long enough, or you listen to some senator, some politician talk long enough, you'll hear them say things about what women ought to do and what they ought to be, right? We hear women ought to do this and do that. Women ought to be this or be that. We need more women this. We need more women that. You hear that all the time, right? We need more women CEOs and business owners and senators. We need more women in the workplace. We need women to make more money than men. You guys hear that all the time, right? This is what we need from women. Now, please hear me clearly. I'm not saying that any of that is wrong or any of that is bad. In fact, in this story herself, Ruth is very busy in the workplace, right? That's the only way her and Naomi are going to survive. But what I am saying is that I think in our society, our focus is wrong. That we tell ourselves what makes a woman worthy is what kind of job she has, and how much money she makes, and how much respect she has in the marketplace. But Ruth shows us that what makes a woman worthy is that she chooses what is right rather than choosing what is prosperous. I am saying that when we must choose between what is right and what is prosperous, worthy women choose what is right. They are focused on what is right, not what is prosperous. And so if I am a woman and I have to choose between being a good wife or taking a better job, a worthy woman chooses what is right, not what is prosperous. By the way, that applies to men too. And if I'm a woman and I have to choose between my responsibilities as a mother and my responsibilities at work, then a worthy woman chooses what is right, not what is prosperous. And that goes for husbands too. If I have to choose between storing up riches in heaven or storing up riches on earth, a worthy woman always chooses what is right, not just what is prosperous. That's one of the amazing things that Ruth shows us in her life. She chooses the life of a beggar and a scavenger because it's right, even when she could have picked something that would have been far more prosperous for her. I want you to consider this with me thirdly. Another thing that makes Ruth's choice so amazing is that she makes this choice because it is right, not so that she will be noticed. When Ruth chooses to stick with Naomi, it seems to me that she doesn't do it to impress other people or to win their praise. You know, I know that they didn't have social media back then, and Ruth did not have an iPhone, but I do find it hard to imagine that if she had gotten to this point where she had to make this decision and she finally decided, I'm not going to go back home, I'm going to stick with Naomi because that's what's right. I have a hard time imagining she would have taken out her phone and taken a selfie with Naomi and said, hey, by the way, I chose to stick with Naomi, right? Aren't I such a good person? Look at what I did. Your God shall be my God and your people shall be my people. Look at this amazing choice that I made. I'm sticking with Naomi. I have a hard time imagining she would have put that on Instagram or posted that on Facebook. It seems to me that when Ruth arrives in Bethlehem, she quietly gets to work doing the best she can to provide for Naomi, and she isn't looking to be noticed. She's not standing on the street corner shouting out about the amazing choice that she made. She chooses it because it's right, not because she wants to be noticed for doing something amazing. We see that in Ruth chapter 2. Look at me, Ruth chapter 2, beginning in verse 5. It says, then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? And the servant in charge of the reapers replied, she is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab. And she said, please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. Thus she came and has remained from the morning until now. She has been sitting in the house for a little while. Then Boaz said to Ruth, listen carefully, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go on from this one, but stay here with my maids. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Indeed, I have commanded the servants not to touch you. When you are thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to them, why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner." Boaz replied to her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully reported to me, how you left your father and your mother and the land of your birth and came to a people that you did not previously know." One of the funny things I find about this part of the story is that when Boaz first finds Ruth, she's not really dressed to impress. At this point, she's been scavenging in the field all day long to the point of exhaustion. The servant tells Boaz that she's sitting in the tent, she's sitting in the house because, likely, she's totally exhausted from the work she's been doing in the field all day. And so in all likelihood, when Boaz sees her, she is hot and sweaty and dirty and dusty, and she is sapped of all of her strength doing the job of a beggar and a vagrant. This is not the way you want to look when you meet your future husband, correct? And yet notice that she's not running around the streets telling everybody about the good deed that she did. In fact, the reason Boaz finds out about her choice is he has to hear about it on the street. He has to hear about it from his servants. And once he hears about what she did, he is totally amazed to hear about what kind of woman this is, what kind of choice she made. That she did not choose what was easy, and she did not choose what was prosperous. She chose what was right. And she did it because it was right, not because she was going to be noticed or rewarded or seen because of it. And I think in doing so, she sets a wonderful example for women in our day and for men in our day as well. So often in our society, in our social media society, we do things because we want people to notice the good things that we do. And we want people to notice so much that our motivations can get sideways sometimes. And we do things so that we can be noticed, not because they're simply what is right. And I want you to notice that's not who Ruth is. That centuries ahead of time, she is keeping the command of Jesus in Matthew chapter 6, when Jesus says, "So when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be honored by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." That's what Ruth is doing. She's not doing what's right. She's not sounding a trumpet before her, letting everybody know about the choice she's made. She just chooses what is right because it's right. She doesn't let her left hand know what her right hand is doing. That's what worthy women do. They do good because it is right, not so that they will be noticed. But I will tell you this much, that if you are the kind of person who chooses what is right because it's right and not because it'll be noticed, there are people who will never see people who will never understand what you did or the kind of thing that you did. But I'll tell you this much, the one person who knows, the one person who matters will always see the things that you do that are right. As Jesus says, "So your giving will be done in secret. Your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." When you choose what is right, the one who matters will always notice. And so Ruth makes this amazing choice. And it is for this choice that she is considered a worthy woman. Of course, I want you to appreciate that in her story, there is one other choice that she makes. She actually makes two amazing choices in this story. And the second choice she makes is this, that Ruth chooses a redeemer rather than choosing foolish pursuits. When Boaz hears about the kind of woman that Ruth is, he is amazed. He can't believe that she made such an incredible choice. And so what he does, because of how amazing she is, Boaz shows himself to be kind and merciful and gracious and generous. He tells Ruth, he says, "Look, from now on, you don't need to be a beggar. You don't need to go scavenge in my field. From now on, you can work alongside my reapers," right? In other words, he's basically giving her permission to raid his fridge. You take whatever you want from my field. You don't have to scavenge and pick up the scraps that are left behind. You take along with the reapers and take what you need. And when Ruth sees that he shows her such mercy and such grace, she chooses to seek his redemption. That's what we read in Ruth chapter 3. Ruth chapter 3 in verse 9. It says, he said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative. Then he said, may you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first by not going after young men, whether poor or rich. Now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you ask, for all my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence. And so what we see in this story is Ruth decides that she's going to chase Boaz. Ruth decides that she's going to ask him to redeem her, to buy her. She wants to become his wife so he can protect her and he can watch over her. I'm a little taken aback by what Boaz says in verse 10. It's kind of interesting, right? He says, may you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first by not going after young men, whether poor or rich. And it seems by saying that Boaz is suggesting that a lesser woman would not have pursued a guy like him. A lesser woman would have gone after younger men. But Ruth demonstrates wisdom in seeking Boaz. Instead of chasing younger men or more attractive men or someone that's closer to her age, she chooses a good man that is capable of redeeming her from her situation. Ruth chooses a redeemer rather than any other foolish pursuits. Now, I guess there is a point that could be made here about dating and marriage and how godly women shouldn't be shallow and they shouldn't just pursue young, attractive men and they should pursue good men. Maybe you could make that point from this story. But I think the reason this story is preserved for us is to make a larger, more important point. The point in this story is that Ruth chooses a redeemer instead of getting caught up in worldly pursuits. And by doing that, she sets an example for all women in our day and in our time. Ladies, there are lots of foolish things that we could spend our lives pursuing. Some people spend their life pursuing prosperity. Some people spend their lives pursuing romance. You could spend your life pursuing social acceptance or physical health or physical beauty. But Ruth shows us that worthy women don't waste their time in those pursuits. Instead, worthy women spend their lives pursuing their Redeemer. And this is the kind of choice that I hope would be true of every woman in this audience. That you would not get caught up in thinking that the world's standards of what makes a woman worthwhile, what makes a woman worthy is really what matters. What really matters is that you're the kind of woman that seeks your Redeemer. May it be that every woman in this church would make a choice like that. May it be that every woman in this church is a worthy woman like Ruth. Women who do not choose what is easy or what is prosperous or do not choose to do things just to be noticed by men, but may it be that you are women who choose what is right. And may it be that you always pursue your Redeemer. The rest of the story of Ruth and Boaz is interesting. They go on and they get married, and it tells us in Ruth 4 and verse 9, then Boaz said to the elders of all the people, you are witnesses today that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance, so that the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his brothers or from the court of his birthplace. You are witnesses today. And so the story tells us that Ruth and Boaz, they end up getting married and they end up having children. And from that seed, from that line, ultimately Jesus comes. It says in verse 16, then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. So they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. To Perez was born Hezron. To Hezron was born Ram. And to Ram, Abinadab. And to Abinadab was born Nahshon. And to Nahshon, Salmon. And to Salmon was born Boaz. And to Boaz, Obed. And to Obed was born Jesse. And to Jesse, David. And from the line of David ultimately comes our Savior, Jesus Christ. From the line of Boaz, Ruth's Redeemer, comes our Redeemer. And may it be that all of us live lives where we pursue our Redeemer like Ruth did. The Bible tells us that we can do that today. If we believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, if we're willing to repent of our sins which caused him to go to the cross, if we're willing to confess his name before men, then we can be baptized in water to have those sins washed away. You can become a child of his. He can redeem you from your lost and broken and empty life. He can spread his covering over you and protect you and give you eternal life. If you need that salvation from Jesus today, we invite you to come to the front while we stand and while we sing.